Cheap microphone and an old guitar. Cheap microphone and an old guitar. I'm a big star at a local bar with a cheap microphone and an old guitar. Cheap microphone and an old guitar. Cheap microphone and an old guitar. I'm a big star at a local bar with a cheap microphone and an old guitar.
A good Thursday to you. It is September 23rd. That is Ayla Brooke and the Soundmen off Fallen Tree Records, Desolation Sounds, the album. And we're grateful to be able to spin it each and every morning. This episode of Real Talk is presented by our presenting sponsor, the team at Bitcoin Well. I am literally, I don't mean to like name drop, and I'm a big deal here. I'm in a bit of a big deal here, but I'm literally texting founding CEO Adam O'Brien as we speak. Sam's like, "You ready to go?" I'm like, "Yeah, give me a second. Yeah, I'm just texting CEO Sam. Just hang on a second. Just give me." We're lining him up for next week. He's tentatively confirmed, Hoyles. We'll get into this later. We don't have to do this in front of the camera, so to speak. But Tuesday, we're going to find time to fit Adam in because you've booked something already. We're going to be talking about Canada and digital currency. Would Canada consider adopting an official, sort of, like we're seeing maybe down in Central, Southern America? This could be
Ecuador, yeah.
Southern America. Am I like naming new continents myself? There yonder in Southern America. O'Brien says he's in on Tuesday. You've got somebody from McGill, too?
Yeah, I got a McGill University prof who's looking at maybe it's time for Canada to adopt digital currency.
More and more countries are going to be paying attention, for example, to El Salvador, and saying,
like Ecuador. Man, we are just...
No, but hey, there are other countries that are looking at it.
Yeah.
Everybody's paying attention. How's it going to work out there? And could it work for... could the United States have an official digital currency? Probably not. The White House has been like, hell no, right? The American, the American dollar, the U.S. dollar is kind of a big deal. And so how does digital currency play in? We'll get into that on Tuesday, and we'll ask questions. What does Adam O'Brien think about it? Ask them questions all the time when we have queries about crypto. You can find Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab on our website, ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's a great show in store. I'm going to say this show is going to move fast. Back-to-back Jacks, back-to-back Real Talk Roundtables coming up in just a second. Our winner's circle with 3 MPs elect. So these are 3 victors following Monday night's election. We're going to be talking to Mike Lake, who has won. How many elections has Mike won in a row? Something like 5 or something. We'll ask him.
1 million.
1 million election victories. The Conservative Member of Parliament for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin will join us. We're going to talk to Blake Desjarlais, who knocked off an incumbent. They say that that's difficult to do, regardless of who the incumbent is. They've got the name recognition. They've got, all of the advantages. Well, Blake Desjarlais came into Edmonton-Griesbach and representing the federal NDP, took the second NDP seat, or let me say one of 2 NDP seats in Alberta. Both of them are in Edmonton. Blake Desjarlais will join us, as will Randy Boissonnault, who we were kind of hanging tight. We were putting this roundtable together over the past couple of days, and we're going, I quite like Mike Lake. He's been on the show before. I think Mike represents a lot of good things in politics. So I go, Mike Lake's a no-brainer. Blake Desjarlais is a no-brainer. That was a great story that a lot of people were following. But we didn't know, with regards to the Liberal, who would we talk to? George Chahal down in Calgary. We've been in touch with his team, and they're looking forward to getting George onto the program. But Randy Boissonnault, that nail-biter in Edmonton-Centre, which is the riding where our studio sits, beating the incumbent, James Cumming. This has, of course, been a back-and-forth battle. Randy Boissonnault holding the seat before James beat him 2 years ago. And so Randy able to announce yesterday that following the counting of the mail-in ballots and everything else, he will be returning to Ottawa, representing the federal Liberals in downtown Edmonton. So Randy, Mike, and Blake will join us in just a couple of minutes' time. And then we're going to get into talk on EVs, which I'm very much looking forward to. This is prompted by the question, is it maybe more environmentally astute? Is it maybe more of a move toward true sustainability to stop focusing on electric vehicles, on EVs, and maybe look more toward synthetic fuels? These are one of the questions that have been prompted by an engaged audience member, and Sarah's put together a panel of, the who's who. Basically, when you want to talk EVs, Paul Horrell from Top Gear. Everybody knows the show Top Gear and the magazine as well. Probably, I would say maybe the most prominent motorsports show, probably the most prominent so-called car show in the world. Top Gear has huge fans from around the world. Great to have Paul joining us, as will be Dr. Nick Eaves, a mechanical engineer out of Windsor, out of the University of Windsor, and Andrew Bell of the EV Association of Alberta, the Electric Vehicle Association of Alberta. So that's going to be a great conversation prompted by many of your questions, which I know no doubt will be coming in as we speak. You can always, of course, be tuning in live and joining us, chiming in on the live chat. And you can also, of course, hit us up on our hashtag RealTalkRJ. That hashtag is powered by the team at Park Power that wants us to remind you that in the province of Alberta, you can choose who provides your internet, electricity, and natural gas. So, like a Real Talker said to me yesterday, Michael, what a beauty Michael is, such an engaged audience member. He said, "What's the catch with Park Power?" I go, "What do you mean, what's the catch?" He goes, "Like they're just going to give me $70 off my first bill." And I said, "No." He goes, "But like what's," I go, "No, there's no catch." He goes, "Well, then why wouldn't I switch over to Park Power?" And I go, "Yeah, why wouldn't you switch over to Park Power? It's easy to do." And the promo code 2021-RealTalk. I sort of misrepresented Michael there. He was more like communicating his intent to switch over. His question was more like, why wouldn't anybody switch over? And I was sort of more along the lines of, Michael, you are speaking my language. 2021-RealTalk is the promo code to get you $70 off your first bill. parkpower.ca. Our friends at Kubi Energy, we're going to be hearing more about Kubi Energy a little bit later on in the show. As a matter of fact, there's a tie-in between Kubi Energy and one of our panelists on our EV roundtable. We're going to get into that. Kubi Energy has been helping people and businesses, organizations turn solar energy dreams and goals into solar energy solutions to power your life. They've been doing installs across Western Canada and continue to do so with their Tesla-certified team. You can find them online, learn about them, their products, their services, and they've got a great blog section on their website at kubienergy.ca. I talked to Daryl at Westworld Computers a while back, and I said, "Hey, what's the number one thing you want Real Talkers to know right now?" And he goes, "Well, everybody's buzzing about the iPhone 13. The iPhone 13 launch day is tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Thursday, it's Friday, September 24th, launch day of the iPhone 13. They've also got the all-new iPad mini, the 6th generation, designed, they say, with a whole bunch of new features, an edge-to-edge screen, really narrow borders, elegant rounded corners. You'd say, what does that have to do with tech? Nothing, but it's fun to hold in your hand. It just feels so good.
It slides into your pocket way better.
Yeah, and believe it or not, that's not Apple's official marketing slogan. The new iPad mini, 6th gen, it feels so good. You can find them both at Westworld Computers. And don't forget to ask about their trade-up program. They guarantee the most for your Apple trade-in. You can find them online at westworld.ca. Let's get to our guests. We're grateful that they've agreed to join us. It has been a whirlwind 40 days or so for these three. Blake Desjarlais, the MP-elect out of Edmonton-Griesbach. Mike Lake, the MP-elect out of Edmonton-Wetaskiwin. And Randy Boissonnault, the MP-elect out of Edmonton-Centre. It's great to have all three of you here. Thanks for doing this on short notice. Blake, I'm going to start with you. This is a whole new world for you, my friend. Relatively young guy, first-time MP. A lot of people are celebrating the fact you're the first openly two-spirit MP in Canadian history, and you beat an incumbent. How are you feeling this morning?
Well, Ryan, thanks so much, first of all, for having the time to spend with me this morning. I think the people of Edmonton-Griesbach have woken up to a beautiful day, and I'm so proud of so many of my neighbors, friends, and relatives who've elected and chose better this election, and I just can't wait to get to work.
Randy, for you, I mean, you had to wait a little bit. I know you probably wanted to give a victory speech on election night. You had to wait. I mean, at one point, I saw that the vote total was hovering right around 130, the difference between you and James Cumming, who had, of course, beat you 2 years ago. Now you're headed back to Ottawa. How are you feeling?
Well, look, a lot of gratitude, Ryan. Thanks for having me on the show. And just a big shout out and thank you to the residents of Edmonton-Centre, neighbors, friends, and people who, came together to send a strong progressive voice into government. And I want to congratulate Blake. It's going to be an honor to serve with you. And Mike, good to see you back. We even crossed paths during the campaign. So it's just wonderful to see you all. I think the clear message is that we have to work together in this parliament, and we're ready to get to work and have started already this morning. So Ryan, thanks very much.
You got it. Mike, your constituents spoke loud and clear. They want to see you back in Ottawa. Refresh my memory. I know I can look it up on the World Wide Web, but I said I'm going to be checking in with Mike in a second. I'll just ask him, is this 5 elections in a row you've won?
This is my sixth.
Sixth. Well, congratulations. Yeah. Obviously a strong mandate from the people in your riding and a strong mandate for Conservatives across the province of Alberta. How are you feeling today with regards to what's next?
Really, really good, really energized to get to work. Like Randy, I want to congratulate both of the other two on this call for their wins. Blake, it's a real honor to have that opportunity, and you'll walking into the House of Commons for the first time is a really special moment. So look forward to that. In regards to my constituents, we're really looking forward to. There's a lot of frustration. I'm sure we'll talk about it over the call. A lot of frustration, reflected in the conversations we were having at the doors, and the goal is to harness that, turn it into some form of meaningful action that makes our country better, and but not let it get over the top. Treat each other with respect, passionately debate things, and that's what we're looking forward to. Hopefully something a little different than in the last parliament. Hopefully we see an increased willingness to work together with members from all parties.
Well, and of course Randy's party is going to need someone to work with them if they're going to get stuff passed, and most likely it's going to be the NDP, though it could be the Bloc, it could be the Conservatives. I want to encourage the three of you to feel free to jump in. Let's treat this like we're all out for coffees. You don't have to wait for me to tap you on the shoulder. Mike, I want to circle back to you so you can set the tone for us, and then we'll go to Blake and Randy. When you talk about the frustration you're hearing from people at the doors, aside from some folks, we know it was a common theme, people saying we're not sure that this election was actually necessary. Aside from that, what else are you talking about?
Well, first of all, that was a really common theme, and it was common at the doors during the election, and it's common after the election, having seen the results of where we're at. Of course, Parliament was supposed to be sitting 3 days ago, where we would have been debating legislation, debating all of the main issues of the day, and who knows when we'll actually be sitting. Of course, we would have had parliamentary committees also taking a look, getting a chance to call expert medical professionals to committee to share their advice on the record for Canadians, with questions being asked by members of Parliament who would have reflected pretty much the same numbers that we're going to reflect now. Everything's just delayed. And so there was that real frustration as we went to the doors. But I think the tone is going to be really important as we move forward too. The frustration we were feeling wasn't frustration from one particular part of the political spectrum. It was from all over the place. And people want to see their elected officials acting. They want to see us taking some action on the big economic issues of the day. It's not enough to talk about the government having Canadians' backs. We have to recognize that decisions we're making today have impact today, and we have to get those decisions right, but they're going to have impact for our kids and grandkids down the road as well. And that has to be an important part of the conversation. Mike,
I appreciate you putting that out there. Randy, I want to give you a chance to respond. I mean, your party's forming government. It's a minority government. Obviously, who wasn't on the show the other day, Hoyles? Was it that made the assertion that nobody won, but Justin Trudeau lost?
That was
it's
Ken.
escaping me. That was Ken Boissonnault.
Yeah.
Randy, would you? I mean, I know your party won, but it's a minority government. Obviously, Mr. Trudeau wanted a majority government. So in that context, do you think you were able to, at the doors, give people that were asking what Mike's talking about a reason or justification for calling that election?
Well, what we talked about in the doors was the fact that this was an opportunity for us to literally get a temperature check, a pulse check from Canadians. Did they want the supports to continue? I mean, at one point, Ryan, we had 500,000 Albertans on the wage subsidy here in Alberta, and 92% of the supports that came to Albertans during the pandemic came from the federal Liberal government. There was a block in McQueen, all 7 houses. We had a woman tell us that all 7 houses on her block would have been lost without the CERB, and that they were voting for us as a block because we saved the block. And that was really important for them, and they'd never voted for us before. And so that message has been received. And the message that I'm taking, that I heard in the doors, is people want real action on climate change. They want to see the greenhouse gas emissions come down. They want COVID in the rearview mirror. They're done. They want the economy opened up, but they want it done safely. And I think the 3 of us have a responsibility in Parliament to lean in and make sure that whatever supports the Alberta government needs on behalf of Albertans to keep them safe, we do. I can tell you, Ryan, I heard every day on the doors about $10 a day childcare, about protecting seniors, housing affordability and affordable housing, and about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And so we have a lot of work to do. And I think the 3 of us could form the basis of even like an Edmonton caucus across party lines and demonstrate to our residents across the city that we're serious about having these conversations on behalf of Edmonton, Alberta. And then we mix it up in the House, but at committee, we can get real work done for people. And the message in this election is people want results. And that's why I'm really thrilled to represent the citizens of Edmonton-Centre again.
Blake, you ran a campaign that regardless of which party we're talking about, it was a campaign, but by the way, with great branding. There was great community mobilization, but you ran a campaign that felt a little bit different than a lot that I've seen, and that's because it was positive. When it comes to how, when you're packing your bags and heading to Ottawa right now, of course there are the priorities as outlined by your party's leader, Jagmeet Singh, but you personally, what do you intend to be focusing on? What are some of the top things on your to-do list?
Well, thanks, Ryan, for that question. And positivity is certainly something Alberta and Albertans have been lacking for a long time. I think it's a refreshing take on many perspectives. There's a lot of nuance in Alberta. And I think that nuance is largely lost when we have kind of the monolith of representatives like we do in our province. Conservatives surround the entire city, which is not a problem, but it also does limit the diversity of perspective and diversity of voice. And so I think people were excited about that in Edmonton-Griesbach. They were excited to see new fresh perspectives on some of the issues Albertans are facing every single day. Some of the ones that I think are a priority are healthcare. I hear that from so many folks, especially in our team. We see nurses, we see frontline care workers, EMS. I met with so many of our healthcare professionals throughout this. My partner, for example, works at the Royal Alexandria Hospital. He sees it every single day. Like, these issues aren't just on the TV. They're in real life. People are being impacted. And so my biggest concern right now is making sure that our frontline healthcare workers and our healthcare system stays intact. New Democrats, we fought hard to bring in universal healthcare across Canada. Some of the best politicians in the country have fought for that. And today it's under attack here in Alberta, and we want to make sure to defend it. People rely on it.
Mike, there's been a lot of speculation around whether or not the unpopularity of Alberta's premier potentially hurt the federal Conservative Party. And then, of course, a lot of people are talking about Maxime Bernier and the PPC and whether or not the moderate growth, I guess, of that party, depending on how you want to look at it, 5, 6, maybe 7% support in some constituencies actually hurt the Conservatives. What's your take on both of those conversations, the provincial influence on the federal party and the PPC's influence on the Conservative Party of Canada?
I mean, certainly both of those had an impact on the election. There's no question. We had those conversations at the door. Particularly dealing with the PPC impact, absolutely, it made a difference. We wound up, and this is something that I think is important for us as a party to take away, we wound up with the same number of seats, but we would have had many, many more if the PPC numbers had stayed where they were in the last election campaign. You only have to look at Edmonton-Centre to look at the impact that the PPC, 2,000 votes the PPC had on that race there. It's an important factor, absolutely. I do want to just address what each of the others were talking about just previously. Randy made a point of referring to the Liberal government's measures that they took on a variety of things. It's really important to point out that in the previous Parliament, the Canadian wage subsidy, for example, the extension of that to 75% was an initiative pushed by largely by our caucus originally, taken on by the Liberals eventually. The NDP was supportive as well. James Cumming was a huge champion of that increase to 75%, I'll point out. Many of the measures were passed by all parties. They weren't just passed by one and debated and made better through debate. That, I think, was that frustration we were talking about, where we could have been working and should continue to work in that direction when we come back. Hopefully, members of parliament on all sides thoughts will be considered and take that team approach. You can't just talk about an Edmonton caucus or a group of us getting together. We have to actually act on things where you would think there would be common interest. I've seen in my time as a member of parliament a national autism strategy voted against by only Liberals, NDP supportive, Greens supportive, others supportive. Randy was in that government, but we still don't have one. 4 years later, it's promised to come in a couple of years, but we could have had it in 2017. The 65th Avenue interchange, the number one ask for infrastructure in this region, at the airport there in Leduc, all of the municipalities agreed that it's the number one ask. The province stepped up with funding, and it didn't get funded this time around. So sometimes there's a lot of talk around working together, but that action just isn't there. The action needs to be there too.
Randy, I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I think if we can work together, and if we kind of take off, to Mike's point, if we take off our party stripes and just say, look, what's the expertise? How can we make things better? I mean, the government was supportive of, for example, Matt Generou's private members bill, and there have been good examples of cross-aisle support. I mean, when we went down the path of passing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that was a cross-aisle support as well. And so, I mean, when you have expertise in somebody like Mike on the autism file, or Blake's lived experience and what you're going to bring to Ottawa, in my case, there's a business lens. There's also an LGBTQ2 lens. I think if we can get out of our partisan lanes and say, how do we deliver a win for our region? I do know that 65th interchange request is into the federal government, Mike, and it is. I mean, we had a suspension of government business because of the election, and now I think
Randy, it's been in for 2 years. It's been in for 2 years.
Yeah, and I think COVID got in the way of a lot of...
An election got in the way.
Yep, an election was called, and now we have to make sure that we get back to the work to build up our city. And I think you're seeing great things happen at the airport, and there's also... the city's growing, and so we're going to have to pay close attention to the infrastructure needs of all parts of the region, and that's what I hope to be pushing for heading back to Ottawa.
Blake, I had an interesting conversation with your now colleague, Heather McPherson, who won again in Edmonton, Strathcona, and we're talking about one instance in particular where she voted against her party, essentially, at least the trend, when it came to pipeline support for the province of Alberta. I don't have to tell you that you're one of two NDP members of parliament in the entire province. How do you foresee walking that line or finding that balance between representing your party's mandate and your party's top priorities, as well as representing what's best for the region that you represent? I know in Edmonton-Griesbach, there's a lot of people that work in traditional energy, that work in oil and gas.
Yeah, I'm included in that group. I'm a former energy worker. I've worked in the oil and the Coal Lake oil sands for much of my life. I was a safety officer to a laborer to a flush by operator. And I know what it's like to actually be a worker in the energy sector. And I often hear politicians speak about the interests of energy workers without actually talking to us. And that's what I'm so excited about, is to bring that perspective to Ottawa, because the reality is it's about workers. It's about trying to make sure your families have an option for your future. It's about making sure that people have the benefits and the security and the support, that a good life with dignity that every Albertan deserves, especially energy workers who have built up our prosperity, who have built up our province, can't be left behind now. I'm someone who had to retrain, after 6 years of working in the Coal Lake oil sands. We have to do that. We have to look at ways that our families can get ahead. And right now, Albertans, I think, are more interested in making sure that they have prosperity, not just in the next few years, but for 50 years, 100 years. And I think we have to start thinking about that. We need some nuance in this discussion. So I think related to my colleague Heather McPherson's statement, she's interested in that as well. And I think from a new NDP Alberta perspective, there's lots of ways we can move forward by supporting workers and supporting the energy sector. They're not mutually exclusive.
Mike, it's been interesting. We did our own polling in a way, utilizing our question of the week from Y Station to ask Real Talkers what their top election priorities were. And I'll be honest, I was forecasting the economic rebound in Canada's post-COVID economic recovery to be number one. It wasn't. As a matter of fact, climate was number one. The environment was number one. Economic recovery in the top three. But it sent a pretty clear message. Your boss, Aaron O'Toole, leader of the party, got ahead of this in a way and released climate policy before the writ drop, before the election was called. And of course, in hindsight, looking back on 2019, a lot of people said that had Andrew Scheer communicated a more clear or more what people perceive to be a more viable climate policy, the election results could have or may have been different. Do you think that the Conservative climate plan resonated with people? There wasn't a huge change in how the seat totals turned out. Looking now in retrospect with the luxury of a few days removed from this election, how do you assess that in this context of climate?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think if you take a look at the numbers, again, important that we did have the highest vote total still in the country. Again, second election in a row that the Conservatives have had the most Canadians vote for them, more Canadians than any other party. And we lost support to the PPC on the far right, which means we gained some support from somewhere, which is probably the center right. And that would be an issue that would be a place where we would win some support, sort of that balance between energy and the environment and the economy. So I think that that's a really good point. I hope that we can continue to kind of find that balance. I have to point out, though, that, at the doors, the conversations were different than the polls we see on Twitter. And I find it's door knocking where you really get a handle on what people are thinking, because they don't know you're coming to the door, and they're not really they're as randomly selected as you get, as long as you're door knocking in different areas. I'm fortunate to have a riding that has about 100,000 constituents in the city and 100,000 outside the city. So my polls at the doors are different than different in different parts of the riding. But the number one thing we were hearing about at the doors was energy, economy, and environment, kind of as a combination. So the economy was a huge issue for me, at least in my constituency. The economy was a huge issue. The question, how are we going to pay for all of this, was a huge issue. And it got asked probably more by seniors than almost anybody else, because they're on many times fixed incomes. And with the inflation rate going up, there's a lot of concern about the impact that that's going to have on their ability to live the same quality of life that they're living right now or have been living.
Randy,
Brian,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that the order that you have in your poll is very similar to what we heard in Edmonton-Centre. It's first climate change, second was COVID, ending COVID and COVID response, and then the economic recovery that comes from that. And then the third thing was $10 a day childcare. And on the energy and environment file, I spoke with dozens of workers in the oil and gas field, and a lot of my family members are in there. And I had this one conversation with this big guy, John. He didn't want to take my flyer. I was outside of a grocery store. And then he came back and he said, I apologize. He said, I didn't give you a chance to give me your spiel and let's talk. He says, I live in Oliver. I work in Fort McMurray. Does that mean you won't talk to me? I said, what are you talking about? Of course I'm going to talk to you. And he said, well, sometimes get a little nervous. I'm an oil and gas worker, but I live in a downtown core. And it's kind of weird. I'm like, it's not weird. You're 20% of Canada's GDP. You're helping green the sector. And he said to me, we know a shift is coming. Just make sure it's a transition, not a switch. And that's the plan that we're on. I mean, Amarjeet Sohi and I and Kent pushed our party hard to get TMX built and bought. And every dollar that comes from TMX, and when it's turned on at the end of 22 in December, all of that money is going to go into the green transition. And that's a legacy piece. The emissions are capped in to our plan, and we're going to start seeing those emissions coming down in the next couple of years. And that's what people at the doors asked me to do.
Blake, in your riding, in the riding of Edmonton-Griesbach, what would you say? I mean, this is an anecdotal question, obviously, unless you were actually tracking it with your door knockers. But what would you say was the number one, or maybe the top two or three things you were hearing from specifically in that riding? Does it align what you're hearing from these two?
Well, it's a combination of some of these realities, right? Like, there's a lot of nuance and diversity in Edmonton-Griesbach than there isn't in other districts. We have some of the most diverse populations. And so immigration is actually one of the bigger issues we hear of, is issues with long wait times. There's a tremendous amount of people in our community who've been reaching out to members of parliament from across our province, even looking for some help on immigration and the wait lines, and even hate, for example, hate motivated attacks. We have Al Rashid Mosque in our community. I met with them many of times, and there's a concern of safety. there's racialized hate in our community, and it's going largely unaddressed by members of parliament across Alberta, and it's a serious issue, and they need help now. We need to be able to condemn these attacks, especially against women, Black women wearing hijab. We need to condemn the terrible treatment of Indigenous people here living on our streets who are houseless. There's a tremendous amount of injustice continuing to go on, and people have seen that. And I think COVID-19 has shown us that that's huge. There's a huge amount of folks who are not being served correctly and properly. And so I've heard that a lot amongst the concerns of Randy and Mike, especially when we're looking at healthcare. I've talked about that already. But one more issue that I think is critical to this discussion is climate change. People in our community are talking about our summer, how hot this summer was, how incredibly difficult it was for families to even grow peas or fruit or make sure their kids stay cool, make sure their animals stay cool. They were concerned about the heat wave. They're concerned about the smoke. We had a public health crisis with smoke this year. It was overshadowed by, of course, COVID-19, but we've had a tremendous amount of issues with respiratory illness because of the onset of smoke due to wildfires. We need a strategy to actually combat these serious crises, especially the last one I'll leave is the opioid crisis.
Absolutely.
118th is a community. We have Boyle Street, Macaulay, Alberta Ave. One of the first people to come congratulate me was a police officer who works here on 118th all the time, 15 years. And he came to meet me and said, Blake, please help with the opioid crisis and gang violence. These things are serious in our community, and how do we keep communities together while also tackling this serious issue, serious crisis of health, of the opioid crisis? We have to do something about it. And I said it before, but how public health is just being ignored, and we need to do something about it here in Alberta.
Hey, Ryan, can I just, on the list of things that Blake brought up, can I just point out like that, and almost the entire list of things that Blake was talking about are things that we should be able to work together on. There is, when we're talking about the issues that Blake's talking about, those are huge issues that we all recognize. We have champions in all of our parties on every one of those issues. We may debate how we get there and how we resolve those issues, and those debates are absolutely relevant and need to be had, and they need to be had passionately with respect, though. And but the issues themselves, they're huge issues, and the parliament that we're about to enter into will be a success if we can, as parliamentarians from all sides, come together to find answers to some of these issues that have been standing for a long time.
And Ryan, I'm going to build on
really
that.
quickly. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You go ahead,
I
Randy.
just want to build. Thanks, Blake. I just want to build on that because, Mike, the other thing is to bring the other orders of government together. We have a municipal election coming up. That's going to be a big reset, at least in our city and in Calgary. But we have to make sure that we have bridges to the provincial government. And, there may be, you may have relationships there that we don't have, that we're going to need to rely on. Because when we have kids in the street overdosing and nobody has a naloxone kit nearby, this is a tragedy. And when we've got a healthcare crisis that has 29 people dying on one day this week through COVID, we're going to have to lean in and we're going to have to work together and cross some provincial, municipal party lines. And because citizens don't care about they don't care about which order of government it is. They just want results, and they want things that they see as problems and challenges solved. And we will have time on the plane together to talk about these things, and in Ottawa and in our own city. So I really do want to see us collaborate on this and bring people from the other orders of government to get the stuff done.
Just assure me, Randy, that because you're in the government caucus, which is a different place to be than in the opposition caucuses, Blake's in a caucus that'll probably be your partner, your sibling in government. And so you probably have a lot more influence, both of you, on where things are going to go from here. Promise me that your voice inside caucus is going to be, we need to listen to the other parties as well, including those, those members of parliament that represent the 34% of Canadians that voted Conservative, because in the last parliament, as the Liberals were looking for partners on different things, they were looking to the NDP and they were looking to the Bloc, and people who voted Conservative and people from areas that voted Conservative were largely forgotten, largely ignored.
So, Mike, I'll accept your challenge, and you and I have known each other a long time now, and I'll raise you. Let's just make sure that your party, and if we can dance together, let's do it. But let's also make sure that there's no blocking of thoughtful legislation for political or partisan reasons, because I think Canadians just want us to get the work done. So I'm happy to meet you more than halfway, my friend.
I want to give Blake a chance to chime in here. Blake, go ahead.
We'll make sure that, NDP has always been the party of accountability. We've always been the party of making sure we go beyond words. And I think Mike and to Randy, I challenge both of you to make sure that we stay committed to that. Mike, you mentioned that you want to see us work together. I'm committed to that. I want to make sure that we continue to get results, or even start getting results for Edmonton, start getting results for Alberta, because these issues are serious. For example, the Conservative incumbent in my district didn't even show up to the one debate we had at Al Rashid Mosque, which was on the violence against women wearing hijab. There was many questions on that. For 6 years, this issue could have been, this is so serious, and I can't stress how serious this is. A 14-year-old girl had a knife brought to her throat, and not one comment from the Conservatives. You have to talk to some of your colleagues about violence in Alberta, because it's out of control. Hate-motivated crime and racialized crime. I worked in Ottawa the last 5 years. I've talked to many Conservatives and I tried to address this issue, not even as an MP-elect, but as just a regular citizen, someone who's committed to justice, someone who's committed to my relatives across our city, no matter where you come from. We need safety, and I think that's something we can all agree on. So let's push for it. Let's listen to the folks who need help now.
I also think that, Ryan, I want to thank you for having a majority of the panelists come from the 2S LGBTQIS community. And Mike, I'm going to say it bluntly, we need your help to push your own caucus, to see us as people. Half of your caucus voted against the conversion therapy bill. That means that half of your colleagues in caucus think that I and Blake should be different people. And that's deeply personally hurtful. And I'm fine. I've got a great partner. I've got a great life. But there are a lot of people who look at that and literally feel that half of the Conservative caucus and a great percentage of the party don't see them as real people. And if we're ever going to open up the house to everybody, we've got to do better. So we're going to need your allyship inside your own caucus. And I'll do everything I can to show people that I'm a human and I'm who I am, and that I deserve everybody's respect, because every LGBTQ2IS person in the world does.
Mike?
So I voted in favor of that legislation.
I know you did.
I will say, though, that in the debate, again, there was very little willingness on the part of your party to hear what were some legitimate concerns brought by folks from the other side that would have allowed us to come to unanimity, I think, on that. And the questions that were being asked were to reflect language from the government's own website on the issue in the legislation on the issue. That was the ask, and there was no willingness to hear that. And so absolutely, we have elected our second LGBTQ member of parliament from our party, Melissa Landsman, who is absolutely fantastic. In addition to Eric Duncan, who's been advocating for an end to the blood ban, as you know, something a longstanding promise by the Liberals that has not been executed, despite, again, unanimity from all of the other parties on it. But for some reason, hasn't been acted on by the Liberal government that had the control over it. So, let's just make sure that there's some consistency in the conversation. And absolutely, as it, if you're looking for allies in moving forward to ensure that we can all live the quality of life, enjoy all of the benefits that Canada has to offer, you can count on me and my colleagues.
Thank you. And just to set the table straight, Ryan and colleagues, we funded the science to end the blood ban. When we got into office, it was 5 years. We got it down to 1 year. We got it down to 3 months. And now Canadian Blood Services and Héma-Québec will be reporting to Health Canada in November, December to get down to 0. So it's coming. It was a long slog, but we're going to keep pushing until it's done.
Okay, I want to wrap with this. I want to thank you all for your time. We've got our next roundtable in the bullpen set to go right now. But Blake, I know that obviously it's very meaningful to you to be heading to Ottawa, and a young, are you 27? Is that right? A 27-year-old Two-Spirit Indigenous man. We're approaching a week today, as a matter of fact, right? The 30th, a week today, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We had interesting conversations as part of our ongoing election coverage on whether or not there was enough attention being paid to reconciliation as part of election platforms. How do you intend to approach this as an MP, and what would represent meaningful action from the government on this file that I know is important to many Canadians, maybe now more than ever before, considering some of the events of this past year?
Well, Ryan, reconciliation is on top of mind of many Canadians, not just here in Alberta, but across the country, and albeit across the world. People look to Canada as let's call it a framework for certain things, especially social justice. Canadians have the opportunity to make sure that we do things right and reflect that across the world and uphold human rights wherever human indignity exists. The reality is that indignity exists in Canada today. It exists right now in Alberta, whether we like it or not. I've experienced it. I know communities without clean water, for example, something the Liberals committed to, and you have no idea how heartbreaking that is. I have a niece. She's just 7, and she's never turned on a tap with clean water. That's simply unacceptable, and saying the right things and not doing them hurt that mission. So Randy, to you, we have to work hard on this. We have to make sure that immediately, within months, that we have a commitment to get, and every single one. I've watched these projects go by. I've worked on several of them. They're not that complicated. We actually, for some reason, I keep hearing this from Liberal cabinet ministers that it's complicated to get water to these communities. No, it's not complicated. First and foremost, we have to stop saying it's complicated. It's quite easy. All we have to do is make these partnerships, make sure those partnerships are sustained in a good way, and have that and move forward on it. It's not rocket science. We're not sending people to space here. We're just trying to get people clean drinking water. We can do something like that. That's tangible. That's real. And I intend to hold the government accountable for that promise. On another front, on reconciliation, we have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, something that many Indigenous people, believe doesn't hit the mark. The reality that the Liberal government has created this reconciliation framework with 3 national organizations, the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, and the ITK, aren't enough. There's people falling through the cracks. We need to meet people where they're at. There's people on 118th Avenue who deserve dignity, who deserve their stories to be heard, who are survivors of the 60s Scoop residential school. I included in them, and they need to have their voices heard too. We can't just push this under the rug for any longer, because as Senator Murray St. Clair said once, the alternative is violence. Let's prevent that. Let's be preventative in this and make sure we do the best we actually can, regardless of the cost.
Gentlemen, I promised to have you out by 10 after 9. Of course, we're doing this live, regardless of when our audience is listening to it. I'm going to hold to that promise in hopes and under the assumption that we will gather together again here on the show. I want to thank the 3 of you for making yourselves available through, I know it is an extremely busy week. The MP-elect for Edmonton-Centre, Randy Boissonnault of the Liberal Party of Canada, Mike Lake, the MP-elect. He'll be returning as the MP for the Conservatives in Edmonton, Wetaskiwin, and of course Blake Desjarlais, who's going to be heading into the House for the very first time as the newly minted MP-elect for the NDP out of Edmonton-Griesbach. To the 3 of you, thank you for the real talk, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Ryan.
You bet.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking EVs in just a second. You can let us know your thoughts on that. I appreciate that there was some, they were, do I say gentlemen? They were cordial, and then all of a sudden they said, "Now let's get into it a little bit. Let's kick some dust on a home plate here a little bit. Let's get real about some of the, not just the priorities and not just some of the talking points, but the performance as well." Right, and you can tell that Randy and Mike have known each other for a while. This is not
familiarity there.
This is not the first time. I mean, I've gathered in studio outside of a pandemic context in a radio studio with those two, and they're always willing to go at it in a way that I think moves the ball forward, because that is when we talk about real talk. We want to bring people on the show that are going to really dig into it. And I got to say, you don't have to be a big fan of the NDP. You can be a huge fan of the NDP. It doesn't matter to me. I think we can all agree, boy, is Blake Desjarlais ever impressive. To me, it doesn't matter how you feel about the NDP's election platform or anything like that. I think that more people like that, people that have lived experience, people that have this perspective that comes across as, in my mind, extremely sincere. I mean, I love that for a guy coming in. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to find that balance between your party's perspectives, or your party's priorities when it comes to, in particular, people might say pipelines.
Yeah.
And representing the people in your riding. He goes, "Well, I am an energy. I was an energy worker for years." I mean, that just, to me, there's more layers to that guy. That's a guy to keep an eye on. If we had more time, I wanted to ask Blake. We'll ask him some other time about Mumalak Kak, the MP out of Nunavut, that said, as an indigenous woman, she didn't feel like there was space for her on Parliament Hill. And so we'll, of course, be checking in with those 3 as Parliament resumes, and I appreciate their availability. Before we talk EVs, we want to remind you that if you are going to be taking your car to Edmonton International Airport and leaving it there because, you're going to be heading out of town. You want to get out of Dodge. You want to go somewhere where you can actually enjoy yourself and maybe reward yourself for what's been a stressful past 18 months. This is your reminder that you can fly nonstop. This is from Edmonton to Phoenix beginning October 7th, a nonstop direct flight from Edmonton to Phoenix. That begins October 7th. Well, in the meantime, while you're planning your travel, if it's any travel out of EIA before the end of 2022, so like 15 months from now, if you know the dates, why not go to jetsetparking.com right now using the promo code RealTalk. You can book parking for $8 a day, not $8 an hour, $8 a day with the promo code RealTalk at jetsetparking.com. You can put your money in the bank, put your car at JetSet. They're locally owned, and you'll love them. You'll find them online at jetsetparking.com. Our friends at Eden Landscaping, they're keeping their eye on the sky. They're keeping their eye on the thermometer, just like the rest of us. We all know what's going to happen over the next 6 weeks or so.
Don't say it.
The seasons are
Don't say it.
changing. I'm doing it in a poet. The seasons are changing, and that means that there will be less landscape construction going on and more landscape design. Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping are bringing outdoor spaces to life like they have for 20 plus years as a family-owned business, a custom landscape builder with a whole ton of satisfied customers. They're really proud of their return business and their referrals. Look them up online at landscapeedmonton.ca and tell them that Real Talk sent you. Our friends at Grand Dog Essentials want to remind you that they deliver to your door. If you're in Calgary, Edmonton, or Central Alberta, right around Red Deer, they're quality raw food delivered on a weekly basis to people that want to do the best they can for their four-legged family members. Though I met a pup the other day with 3 legs, a real beauty. Unbelievable. These dogs don't know they only have 3. They just go on about their business, still running, jumping, unbelievable. Your 3 and 4-legged family members can benefit. And I'm talking dogs here, of course. Don't feed quality raw food to your cat from Grand Dog, although I don't know about that. Maybe ask their team of nutritionists, just like we did, our family. We said there's some digestive issues with Moses and Monroe. How can you help us out? They did, which is why I'm so proud to refer you to granddog.ca. The promo code RealTalk gets you 10% off your first-time order with Grand Dog Essentials, quality raw food. We've been looking forward to this conversation on the show for a long time. We know that EVs, electric vehicles, are becoming more and more the norm. You probably see it. I mean, depending on where you live, or maybe some of you say, well, you know what is really on my radar when it comes to movement, transport? I see bikes and I see city buses. Okay, fine. But if you're spending a lot of time on the road, if you're spending time in traffic, if you're on the freeway, you're probably seeing more EVs now than ever before. Automakers are approaching this in motivated fashion, many of them suggesting that within the next 10 to 15-year window, nearly their entire lineup will be electric. But is it actually the best move for the planet? Why aren't we talking more about things like synthetic fuels? Sarah Hoyles, producer of this show, has lined up a roundtable panel that I know is going to enrich our understanding about this, and it's a real pleasure to welcome them to the program. Paul Horrell is a leading international motoring journalist with more than 3 decades experience, of course, affiliated with Top Gear, a household name when it comes to motoring enthusiasts around the world. It's a pleasure to welcome Paul to the show. Dr. Nick Eaves is an assistant professor at the University of Windsor. His research interests are combustion and nanoparticle technology, earning his doctorate from the University of Toronto, a research associate at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And rounding out our panel is Andrew Bell. Andrew's director of the Electric Vehicle Association of Alberta, which is dedicated to spreading awareness and promoting the adoption of EVs and charging infrastructure. So 3 great perspectives here. And gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the program, encourage you to interact with one another, jump in if you see the need. Paul, would you agree with my assessment on the growth of the EV market and where it's going? Is this pretty much going to be the norm, EVs 10 years from now?
It's going to get close to that in terms of the new cars that people buy. One of the main reasons we're also discussing synthetic fuels is that you have to have a carbon neutral fuel that will power the cars that people still have. Because if you buy a car now, I think you'd be expecting a gasoline car. If you buy it now, I think you'd be expecting to drive it still in 15 years' time. And so what are you going to drive it with? What are you going to put in the tank? But for new cars being bought in 10 to 15 years time, I suspect that the majority will be electric.
Andrew, what are you seeing? I mean, from your position with the EV Association of Alberta, if we compare it from 5 years ago to now, how much growth has there been in the market? And I mean, when it comes to, the rubber actually hitting the road, where is it going?
There's been a tremendous amount of growth in the last 5 years for sure. Even here in oil country Alberta, I'm noticing like far more EVs than in previous years. Like I've been in the sphere since 2008 following this, and had my first plug-in vehicle converted back in 2010. So I was one of the first to actually do it in this province. And I'd say, in the last 2-3 years, there's definitely a big uptake, but Alberta is like fourth in the lead for EV adoption. We're a distant fourth, but it's nice to see that progress happening.
Andrew, when you're talking about fourth, are you talking about provinces and territories in Canada, and are we talking about per capita EV ownership?
Yes, I am. Yeah, so Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia hold the lion's share of EV adoption. They probably hold over 90% of all plug-in vehicles in Canada. So we're definitely a distant fourth.
Wow. Dr. Eaves, how has your research factored into this conversation in particular? How do you take your expertise in nanoparticle technology and combustion and apply it to what we're talking about here this morning?
So a lot of it actually relates to what Paul was mentioning earlier, is that, well, what do we do in the meantime between now where we're at, where we have kind of there is a increasing pace of uptake of EVs, but majority of consumers are still driving internal combustion engine powered vehicles. And even if they buy one today, it's still going to be for quite a while longer. My research actually focuses more on how do we feed the synthetic fuel synthesis process in such a way that it is a overall green process to actually synthesize the fuels. If I can get into a discussion basically about what synthetic fuels are, talk about how they're made. Synthetic fuels have actually been around for quite a long time. They're actually nothing new. There's been synthetic fuels that have used coal in the past, or biomass, or other solid feed to actually create these synthetic fuels. What we're probably talking about nowadays is actually what you would call e-fuels, or electric synthetic fuels. And now the feedstock for those, the reason it's so interesting is because it actually uses the carbon that is already in the atmosphere to drive this whole production process. So if you have, say, an ability to suck, say, the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, you then combine that with some hydrogen. You can produce that hydrogen in different ways. Well, that gives you what's called syngas. And eventually that syngas can be converted into either gasoline or gasoline equivalent, diesel equivalent, or even a jet fuel equivalent. Now, the question is, I said carbon dioxide, you can get that carbon feedstock from the air, but where do we get this hydrogen? Well, right now, the way we get hydrogen is by electrolysis process. We take water, run electricity through it, we split that into hydrogen and oxygen. Very, very energy intensive. So this whole synthetic fuel process, because of this, actually takes an incredible amount of energy to be able to produce these synthetic fuels. And actually, if you compare it on an energy basis, comparing to just charging an electric battery, it's about a 4-to-1, which is somewhat problematic for the overall long-term using synthetic fuels. But what I'm actually interested in my research is, where do we get this hydrogen feedstock? And in Canada, we have tons of natural resources. We have tons of natural gas, tons of other potential fossil fuel-based feedstocks. If we could somehow separate, and there are people working on this, separate the hydrogen and carbon in hydrocarbons, so we can turn the carbon, instead of turning the carbon dioxide, which is a big concern, obviously for climate change, if instead we could turn that into valuable products, different nanomaterials, different nanoparticles, potentially even something called graphene, which is a very, very cool material that is essentially, if you take, your graphite and your carbon pencil and you sliced it 1 atom thick, that is graphene. It's actually discovered in 2010 and has won the Nobel Prize, the person who discovered it. if we can find a way to take our natural resources and convert it into hydrogen and then a useful carbon product that isn't carbon dioxide, then that is actually one of the key things that might drive this synthetic fuels and making it undergo maybe more widespread adoption.
Nick, how far away are we from all of this? Like, is this purely theoretical at this point, or is some of this stuff happening already?
So in terms of stuff that I talked about, in terms of the, splitting the natural gas into, say, carbon hydrogen components, that is in more or less the theoretical stage. If you're talking about the carbon capture and using electrolysis to split water, that is actually being put into practice right now. There's a fairly large collaboration between Porsche and I forget the company's name in Chile right now, or Chile, I should say. And they're actually opening a plant to do exactly just this. They predict by 2026, they'll be able to produce, I believe it was 500 million liters of this synthetic gasoline. Now, 500 million sounds like a lot. If you ever heard the term drop in the bucket, this is probably the most appropriate use of that saying ever. If you look at the US, they use 120 billion liters a year.
Yeah, I think Porsche's, use for that fuel that they produce in 2026 is that it will power all their racing cars and their customer race cars, and it will put one tank of fuel into every car that comes off the end of the production line. And apart from that, it's all been used up.
Yeah, that's it.
Paul,
exactly.
I've been watching, Paul and Andrew listen to you talk, Nick, and both of you are nodding along as he's going. So I want to give both of you a chance to comment on it. But Paul, is this something when it comes to auto enthusiasts and when it comes to people working in the industry, is this something that you think most people is this an initiative or a theory that most people are aware of? Would you characterize it maybe even as a developing trend?
Oh, yes. There's no doubt that people for a long time have wished for a carbon neutral fuel, which will enable them to drive the cars that we've got on the road, partly because, as you say, auto enthusiasts on the whole like petrol engines, although that's probably auto enthusiasts who haven't driven an electric car, because they're also pretty cool things to drive. But also, it's just a great idea to be able to run the cars that we've got sustainably rather than throw them all down a hole in the ground and build a load of new ones.
Yeah, no kidding. We have a question coming up from a young Real Talker in just a second that'll tap into that. But I'm curious, Andrew, for your take on this. I mean, you're director of the EV Association of Alberta, but correct me if I'm wrong. If there are amazing developments when it comes to what you might describe as a green fuel or an E fuel or these synthetic fuels, does it in a way hurt or take away from or decrease the demand of the purists' understanding of what an EV is?
Sure. I think our group recognizes that there is no single silver bullet on where we're going to go forward with this. There is, like Nick is saying, there is going to be a transitional period. We just can't just go cold turkey just like that, get everyone driving EVs. And EVs currently are not a fit for every single driver behind the wheel. Our prime goal is really just to reduce our environmental impact, and we see EVs as part of that solution, a big part of that solution. So yes.
Okay. We absolutely love this, and we're going to be doing more of this on the show, allowing audience members, or inviting, let me say, audience members to chime in and provide questions for our panels. And Paul, this one's coming straight to you, although we will get all three of you to chime in. Paul, will come to you first. This is 13-year-old Real Talker Brady.
Hi, Mr. Horrell.
Hello,
My name is Brady. I am a huge fan of Top Gear. I love all your work. And my question for you is, what's the future of the internal combustion engine away from the private racetracks and the bajillionaires? Will the average car enthusiast be able to enjoy the internal combustion engine 30 to 40 years in the future? Or will it just be with those private racetracks and bajillionaires?
I appreciate that from Brady. Paul?
I don't think that internal combustion engines will be legislated off the road. We will still be able to enjoy them. I mean, one of the things I always say is there are millions of horses in Britain. None of them are used for transport. There are thousands of sailboats. There are thousands of hot air balloons. There are all sorts of means of transport that are not means of transport. They're recreation, and I think that is the way the internal combustion engine will go. You'll still be able to use it as a low mileage thing, just something that you take out on the weekend. And if you've got a boring commute, do it in a more environmentally clean car.
Andrew, what do you think?
I think that everything's going to take time to switch over, and as far as the auto racing industry is concerned, my brother's actually was part of it for many years. He worked for various Formula One teams, and even he's seen the transition going towards electric. You've got the Formula E series, for example, that's set up about 5 years ago. That's got a big following now. Nothing stays the same, and things transition, and that's part of it.
Nick, do you have a professional or personal opinion on Brady's question?
I personally would love to still be able to enjoy an internal combustion engine in 30 to 40 years from now. That's what got me into mechanical engineering and down this career path. For the sake of the planet, though, I kind of agree with Paul and Andrew, is that the internal combustion engine is not dead. However, the role of it is going to continue to decrease over the years, and simply because we have to address climate change. Yeah. Whether it's going to be on the time scale of which governments are currently predicting and legislating, I don't know. I know how to burn the fuels. I don't really know everything else surrounding it around that. But I think it might be a longer road than people are anticipating, which is why looking at other solutions is so important. Synthetic fuels being one of the potential options.
Dr. Eaves, what do you mean? I love the personal stories. For me, it helps the audience and me better understand the perspectives guests bring to the table. You essentially say internal combustion engines is what got you into mechanical engineering. You a huge car guy?
I like to think of myself as that. Mostly a lot of it was driven that my dad, born in the muscle car era, he had a Dodge Charger. The thing got about 8 miles per gallon by the time he was done modifying it. We always said one day we'd restore a classic car together. And, personally, I think there's no better sound than a revving V8. I just love it. Unfortunately, I kind of realize it can't be that way forever, for what we have to do for the planet. So, for someone who's in internal combustion engine research, loves the internal combustion engine, I think it's a pretty clear story if I'm also recognizing the fact that, things have to change. So.
Paul,
I think it's worth.
Yeah, go ahead. Paul.
Sorry, go on.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's worth looking at why we might use these different forms of propulsion in different circumstances. So, why would you have an electric vehicle? The answer is, as you say, that it's the most efficient way of using 1 kilowatt hour of electricity to drive 2-3 kilometers. You can't drive anything like 2-3 kilometers if you put that electricity into producing synthetic fuel. But the trouble with electricity is you can't actually transport it. You can't put it on a boat and carry it from the desert to Canada or from the desert to Europe. So the idea with the synthetic fuel is that where you have excess renewable electricity, for example, the Porsche project is down in Patagonia, where there's loads and loads and loads of wind and no people. So you put up some windmills, you generate the electricity, you make the fuel, you put the fuel in a tanker, and you ship it to where the cars are. And it's the same in the Arabian desert. There will be the prospect of huge solar farms that, again, can generate the electricity and produce the synthetic fuel. Possibly northern Canada, too. It's pretty windy up there, and there aren't many cars. So the idea of manufacturing synthetic fuel is to use renewable energy where we couldn't otherwise use it. And that gives us a pathway to keeping the combustion engine cars going for some of the time, or in some locations, and for some uses, particularly using the old cars. And then we use the electricity that's generated close to the cars to power the cars in the most efficient possible way, which is drive an electric battery car.
Andrew, you might roll your eyes at this, but I'll be honest, when it comes to changing people's minds, I'm so impressed at so many things about EVs. A couple friends have taken me out in their Teslas. The Model X's in particular are just remarkable. I mean, I tell people they're like street bike fast. The acceleration on these cars, the performance is like really nothing. I've had a chance to drive a Ferrari once in my life, and I would say that the performance is relatively comparable. Though Paul may take issue with that. He's the expert. Let me make my point quickly, and then I'll get you all to chime in. I'm the proud owner. I love classic cars, and we've got a 65 Cadillac with that 7.2 liter 429 V8. And just when I start that thing up, and it just, it's just, you know what I'm talking about. It's just this fabulous experience driving this car. But if you were to have me, in front of a jury, make a justification for the emissions of that car, for the amount of fuel that it uses, or for its environmental impact, aside from the fact that I do pay carbon tax on the fuel I put into it, I might not be able to justify it outside of all these factors, like how it makes me feel and how it sounds. Is that the hump that you think the EV industry needs to get over? It's not necessarily a logical one. It's almost more of an emotional connection that people have.
Yeah, and I think that's part of one of the things that we haven't done very well, or the OEMs haven't done very well in selling electric cars, is recognizing that cars are an emotional purchase. When they advertise on TV, they go for lots of other things other than just the car itself, because it is an emotional purchase. And there's always going to be a place, for the time being, for, that raw sound, that we're so used to. But I think once people actually get behind an electric car and actually experience electric drive for the very first time, they get it. Like the other day, my daughter had a birthday party, and I took their friends home afterwards. They knew about the Tesla, but they'd never been in it. And we were at a stoplight. Okay, girls, it's about to turn green. And then I showed them the acceleration. I got their attention straight away. They didn't care about any sound from the car just being thrown in the back of the seat. They were very interested in driving that and taking another ride again very soon.
Is that it, Paul? People just need to, the driving equivalent of walk a mile. People just need to drive a mile in an EV to be converted.
I mean, who are these people of whom we speak? There are car enthusiasts. There are gearheads. There are people like me, who like to hear the engine, and you with your Cadillac. But the fact is, most people just don't, and 100 years ago, Rolls-Royce wanted to make a perfectly smooth, silent car. And 100 years later, they had a car that was less smooth and less silent than a 2010 Nissan Leaf. The fact is, electric cars are what most people want. They're smooth and silent. There's no step as they shift gear. They just move away exactly as you ask them to without any fuss. And, for most people, that's the sign of a good car. My daughter, the first time I took her out in a Porsche 911, when I changed gear, she was horrified at the sound of it. And she said, Dad, stop moving that noise lever. She thought the sole purpose of the lever by next to my knee was to make the car louder and more scary sounding, and she didn't care for it. She does now, but she didn't then.
This is but noise is such a thing, and people are going to roll their eyes at me. Like, I'll be honest with you guys, full disclosure, we'll hear from people that live in urban centers, and they get all upset, at people in their Harley Davidsons and their muscle cars and all the tuner cars for making all this noise. And I'm always the guy that's like, if you don't want to hear the noise, don't live on cruising strips. Like, I've been somewhat unsympathetic, and not everyone has appreciated my attitude there, but I am a noise guy. I had a chance to drive an AMG Mercedes for a while. I didn't own it, but you guys know, Paul, you in particular, it's got a button right there on the dashboard with the picture of the exhaust, and you can push the button and it makes it twice as loud. And I didn't do it in circumstances where it needed to be loud. I did it every time I started the car. That's just the way I'm hard. I mean, my colleagues here in the studio are rolling their eyes. They're getting they can't even believe it. Like, I am that jerk. But it's a
who
thing.
Is this child?
Who is this man-child? But it's a thing.
Yeah. No, it is. But I think you'll find, as your colleagues in the studio would attest, it's a bit of a minority sport these days.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that. We've got an interesting question here from Kim on our live chat, who wonders, are our landfills going to be filled with internal combustion vehicles? I mean, that'll kill the climate. What's a reasonable transition plan to EV? What about conversion kits? Doctor, is this in your wheelhouse? Can we talk to you about this? I mean, ideally, could you get to a point? I mean, let me ask you on two fronts. Number one, a conversion kit to take a 65 Cadillac to electric. And when we talk about synthetic vehicles, pardon the stupid question, but can I just pull up to a tank and put that fuel into the same car that's been burning other fuel for 65 years?
Yeah, so I think I'll answer the second question because that's a bit more in my wheelhouse than maybe the conversion kit. The idea is that this concept of synthetic fuels to work, they have to be processed enough such that they are 100% drop-in. From the consumer standpoint, whether I pull up to a gas station, whether it's selling regular gasoline, whether it's selling a synthetic gasoline, the end experience for the consumer filling up their tank is that they won't know the difference. And that's actually technologically capable now with today's technology. And that's why it's, there is an advantage to the synthetic fuels in that consumers don't have to really change their behavior. They can just pull up to the gas station like they usually would, get the synthetic fuel and go on. One of the other interesting things about synthetic fuels, gasoline and diesel, when we talk about gasoline diesel fuel, it's not like it's just made of one substance, one component. It's actually mixed up or made up a wide array of different compounds. And some of those compounds aren't very nice, and they can lead to other somewhat nasty emissions coming out the tailpipe. These synthetic fuels, they tend to be in a much narrower range in terms of the compounds, in terms of the composition of the actual fuels. What this means is that they tend to burn a lot cleaner. Now, you can't get around the carbon dioxide. If you have a combustion process, you're going to produce carbon dioxide. But you can reduce the secondary emissions, which also have, or what we would consider emissions from the combustion process. And so you don't have as much particulate matter formation. And that's one big thing in terms of climate change. Particulate emissions are one of the second largest contributors to climate change after carbon dioxide. And so I don't really have a good answer for the conversion thing, but in terms of synthetic fuel, the idea is, yes, it's just a drop in. In terms of consumers, they don't really notice the difference. And I think when we talk about, mentioned is an internal combustion engine just for noise. Well, there is a market that legitimately does need it for their daily, work activities. You can imagine someone who's maybe a tradesperson, they're hauling their heavy equipment on their big truck from point A to point B on the job site. If you look at the range of electric vehicles when they are heavily loaded, it can go down quite dramatically. So it's not, this whole synthetic fuel thing, the bridge, it's not just for the motorhead who wants to hear the engine roar. There are actually, now I would agree that most of these are niche, and 95% of consumers' ranges away from an electric vehicle nowadays is more than sufficient for their needs. But there is a part of the market that actually do and will still need internal combustion engines, not even including heavy duty transport, tractor trailers, marine shipping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't really have a good answer for the conversion kit one, but yes, in terms of the synthetic fuels, the idea is just drop it in, consumer doesn't notice a difference, and you go.
Well, let me I'll circle back on that with conversion kits. Paul, I want to ask you, who's leading the way on that, and what do you see uptick like that looking like? Where's consumer demand? How does that price out? I guess it obviously depends on the type of vehicle we're talking about. And Andrew, I know you're in the business of answering objections, and so we'll give you a chance to chime in on this as well. Really quickly, I'm going to take a break to remind you. It seems like a pretty fitting time to remind you that our friends at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge Jeep have the best selection of the Jeep lineup in the entire province of Alberta, and that includes the brand new Jeep Wrangler E. I had a chance to check it out. It is a remarkable vehicle. This thing switches back and forth between electric and internal combustion. I don't understand how it works. I'm not here to explain it to you, and even if I tried, none of you would trust me because you shouldn't. I'm not a scientist, but I did drive it, and I can tell you it is a remarkable experience. The Jeep Wrangler E with that classic styling, but looking forward, of course, with the technology it brings to the table. You can take a look at it, take one for a test drive, pick one up. from our friends at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge Jeep.
The following paid advertisement does not necessarily represent the views of Ryan Jesperson, Real Talk, or Relay Communications Group Incorporated. It's time for a fresh perspective. Edmonton deserves a leader who will work for you and with you. Someone who understands the strengths of our community to do things better and faster. Cheryl Watson has built her career on results, not promises. On October 18th, vote Watson for mayor, and together, let's build a city that works. This ad is paid for by the Watson for Mayor campaign.
Friends, this is the last day that you can get in on the 44-year tradition that is the Alberta Beef Roundup at Friesen Brothers. That's right, it wraps up today, September 23rd, but you've still got time to check them out online at friesen.com and place your order. This is a whole hip of fresh Alberta beef, custom cut per your wishes. Whatever you tell the real butchers at Friesen Brothers to do with regards to the amount of ground round you want, stewing cubes, roasts, steaks, what have you, that's what they'll deliver. Fresh and wrapped, ready for your freezer. A limited time offer. It's the Alberta Beef Roundup at 16 Friesen Brothers stores across the province of Alberta. For more than 65 years, they have been Alberta grown and Alberta owned. Find them at friesen.com. A great conversation with Andrew Bell, director of the Electric Vehicle Association of Alberta, Paul Horrell, leading international motoring journalist with more than 30 years experience, of course, with Top Gear, and Dr. Nick Eaves at the University of Windsor, an expert in combustion and nanoparticle technology. There's a lot of talk right now, fellas. We've got an engaged audience here, and I know that they're all in on this conversation, our live chat right now. A lot of talk about lithium. That's one of the environmental concerns that I know people have around the batteries that are in these EVs. Andrew, I'm sure you hear this all the time. What's the message on the not negligible environmental impact that comes along with EVs, in particular the batteries?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with the construction of the batteries. A lot of people assume that because it's called a lithium battery, it's full of lithium. It's not. It's only a small proportion of the battery. Most of the lithium that goes to the marketplace is from a very lengthy evaporation process. Anything that your viewers, listeners have seen online where it's suggested that lithium is dug up solely from mines, that's not true. It's part of the concerted effort to put a lot of misinformation out there about EVs. Millions of dollars are spent, by those interests that benefit from doing so to slow down the eventual adoption of EVs. Now, there is no free lunch. You need the batteries to make the car go, right? But all of the components that are in the batteries are also used in everyday items that we use today. So if you're going to have a very serious concerns about electric car batteries, then why are we not so concerned about the batteries in our laptops, our cell phones, the equipment that we're using on this podcast today?
Yeah, please don't shine the light on us. That's very inconvenient for us, Paul. Andrew, I don't need the heat. All right.
Yeah, but it's true. There is definitely concerns, but the lithium is getting less of an issue because the industry is kind of moving away from that. Same with cobalt. Cobalt stabilizes the batteries. Cobalt is horrifically expensive, so cobalt will be phased out. China is probably the leader in the world for EVs as far as numbers are concerned. Tesla has entered that country and producing many EVs already. They use no cobalt in their batteries. The Chinese government said no.
Paul, this has been part of your work. I mean, this has been part of how you've approached this at Top Gear. I don't know if you prefer the phrase myth busting, but we know that you've taken this on with regards to EVs being hard to charge, or they can't go very far, or they're pricey, or they don't hold their value. Can we ask you to get into that?
Well, starting with the battery thing, they do use more lithium than a mobile phone does because, hey, they're just bigger and heavier to be driven along. However, the car business isn't stupid, and these minerals are, as you say, expensive, and so they will find a way of using less of them and of recycling them. Now, at the moment, we don't have to recycle the batteries because there are very few of them coming on the market. There are very few old batteries because, hey, it turns out that the batteries in early electric cars didn't turn into a 1-ton brick after 1 year like you might have expected them to if you had a 2010 mobile phone. They lasted and lasted and lasted, and so they're not actually available for recycling yet, but they soon, they eventually will be. And then the car business is working now on recovering those metals in the batteries, because that's a cheaper way of getting hold of them for the next generation of batteries to put into the new cars than it would be to get the stuff from raw materials. And it's interesting to note that the man who basically invented the Tesla, J.B. Straubel, he was responsible for all their developments in terms of batteries, motors, electronics, driver assistance, all of that stuff. He left Tesla a couple of years ago to start up a battery recycling company. And if he succeeds, and I don't doubt he will because he's one of the smartest men on the planet, we will have a recycling network that will also be able to recycle the other electronic waste that we all tip into the ground at the moment, all the old phones, laptops, and communication and entertainment equipment. So one of the things about the car business is that it is one of the most inspected and most transparent businesses around. And as we know from the Volkswagen diesel scandal, if they get up to any jiggery pokery, they're found out. And so they're going to have to be clean on this, and it's economically viable for them to be clean. It makes more sense to recycle the metals than it does to dig up new ones, and so that's what they'll do. If you want me to bust a few myths about car charging and stuff like that, I'm happy to. But I think because I only know the UK situation very well, I might hand over to control to your local experts on that. Well, if I may.
It looks to me. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on your toes there, but it looks to me, Andrew, like you were eager to respond to something Paul just said.
Oh, I just agreed with everything he was saying,
Well, that's boring. That's boring for a round table.
No, I think Paul hit it right nail on the head, really.
Are you, Paul, let me back to you for a second. I'd be curious for all your this really doesn't have anything to do, doctor, with your research or anything like that. But Paul, were you a little surprised that Volkswagen, aside from paying some heavy fines, but compared to their revenues, I'm not sure they were that heavy. Were you surprised that Volkswagen kind of dodged a bullet when it came to the court of public opinion? Like, it's still a strong brand.
Completely.
People are still buying Volkswagens.
I know I'm saying nice things about some aspects of the motor industry, but on the whole, I'm pretty suspicious of them. And, one of the things that came out of the Volkswagen scandal was that after they were starting to recall the cars, people said to me, will my car run less well after the recall? Will my car use more diesel after the recall? Will my car be less reliable after the recall? Will my car be worth less after the recall? Not one of them said, will my car poison your child less after the recall? People just, and this isn't, I don't think, a bad reflection on Volkswagen, although Volkswagen did lie and cheat and poison our children, but it's a bad reflection on the public. The public have shown a notable failure to give a crap about some very important issues here.
Yeah.
Nailed it. Do either of you want to add to that?
Yeah, just that if people are not fully aware of what happened with Dieselgate, there's an excellent series on Netflix right now, the Explained series, and one of them is totally on the VW scandal.
That Explained series is amazing. But basically, correct me if I'm wrong, you three. Basically what it was Volkswagen was kind of cooking the books. Like they were pushing out like inaccurate and they were lying. They were pushing out false emissions data about their cars' performance.
And they weren't the only ones that were doing it. But they just did it in the most egregious fashion, and they had the misfortune to be the first that were found out. And they're doing some good work on electric vehicles now. They brought out reasonably priced electric vehicles that are made with transparently sourced materials and renewable energy and all of that. They will deliver a car to your driveway that is effectively carbon neutral by the time it arrives there.
Wow. Dr. Eaves, we have a really interesting question from one of our audience members, uses the handle some random guy, who muses renewable electricity with synthetic fuel as the storage medium. Could it work?
Well, that's kind of the entire idea, and I think Paul was really articulating that, in that if you have an area in the world where there's an abundance of this renewable electricity, whether it be wind, solar, what have you, it's not very easy to transport it. So the idea is you need to convert that into something that you can ship across the ocean or ship wherever you have to. And if you look at the synthetic fuel, instead of looking at it as a hydrocarbon fuel, you look at it as a renewable energy carrier. It is much easier to carry a liquid fuel than it is to transport raw electricity to where it's needed to be used. So that that viewer kind of hit the nail on the head. The whole gist behind synthetic fuel is if the manufacturing process is all driven by renewable energy sources, and if you take the carbon to form the hydrocarbons from the atmosphere, then you can look at that entire process as a net zero carbon process. And that's kind of what we're going for. So yes, that's kind of hits it nail directly on the head. Or one thing that's kind of dear to my heart when you mentioned about the Dieselgate, for a lot of internal combustion engine researchers, it was actually somewhat upsetting what happened over that entire thing. Because when you look at if your goal is to reduce the amount of CO2 emitted into the atmosphere, which is our goal, and you compare gasoline to diesel engines, diesel is a superior technology.
Yeah.
However, with the caveat, if it's treated with the proper after treatment systems on the vehicle, do you have a particulate filter? Do you have a selective catalytic reduction to reduce the NOx? Do you have a diesel oxidizer catalyst? So from an internal combustion engine research, it's kind of sad that this Dieselgate kind of more or less killed the diesel engine in terms of for light use. Because when you look at the actual technology, even if you compare gasoline direct injection, which is now taking over for most gasoline vehicles now, gasoline direct injection actually produces more of those particulate emissions that I mentioned, which are also very bad for in terms of climate forcers, also very bad in terms of human health. They're cancerous. And so it's just a little upsetting that technology got thrown away because of some companies that were being unscrupulous. Because if you look at a properly outfitted diesel internal combustion vehicle driven by a diesel internal combustion engine, its emission profile are actually superior to what we have now in terms of gasoline technologies. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, what Volkswagen was trying to do was essentially sell diesel engines and fiddle them so that they thought they didn't need that expensive after treatment equipment.
Well, they completely bypassed it. There was something in the engine computer that said if you're running an emission test, don't put it through the emissions reduction system. And if just because of the RPM that it was running at the load, it could figure out, oh, I'm doing an emission test now, I better activate all my emissions reduction strategies. So it's just to me, as an internal combustion engine researcher, understands that the main goal is reduction in CO2. It's just a little bit upsetting that we kind of moved away from diesel, because it is actually the superior technology. Is just the publicity around it was just horrid. Absolutely.
That's so shady. It is so shady. Andrew, let me ask you, I want to ask all three of you this, but as we near the end of this, time has flown, and we're so grateful for your time, all three of you. But Andrew, I'm curious to know, and I'll ask each of you, what is the biggest hurdle standing in the way of more mainstream adoption of either EVs or Doctor, if you want to talk about synthetic fuels, whatever. I mean, let's talk about more sustainable modes of transportation. In past, I know that range has been a big one. I know that reliability in winter has been a big one. Price has been a big one. What about things like charging stations? What about the convenience factor? I mean, I can fill up my car, in 90 seconds or 2 minutes with gas. If I'm going to charge my car, I think I have to go for lunch, right? While it charges. What are the biggest hurdles that are standing in the way?
I think fast charging networks, particularly in our province here in Alberta. There's over close to 200 charging stations in Calgary now, and over 100 in Edmonton. So Calgary is ahead of us here in Edmonton. But really, most of the charging is done at home. Like, I feel like I'm in a Groundhog movie. Every more time I wake up, my car is full. It's all right. It's waiting for me, ready to go. So I just treat it like an iPhone. I just plug it in when I get home from work, and I forget about it. And it takes about just a little over an hour to replace what I used that day. And every now and then I will do a long distance trip, and there's a fast charging network in place, that's held my needs so far. But it's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario for the consumer and the manufacturer. The manufacturer doesn't want to make all these EVs if the customers are nervous about a charging network not being there, for them, because they're so used to that long range with gasoline, So the batteries are getting better, but it'll take time. So charging infrastructure is definitely really important.
Andrew, any chance I have to, no pun intended, but to plug one of our, important and beloved sponsors? I do. And my understanding is that, and I would love to hear the details of this. I've heard some people say that, it costs them between $7 and $9 or something like that if they plug their car in and charge it from empty, the battery, all the way up to full. My understanding is that you've actually, is this true, partnered with Kubi Energy, and you're essentially, aside from install costs, obviously, you're charging your car with sunlight. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm driving on sunshine. So we bought Tesla stock in the early years, basically $27 a share. And we cashed out. Yeah. And hindsight's a wonderful thing. Wish I did more. But we now have a lake lot, which will be an eventual retirement home. And we had Kubi Energy put out a nice size solar array. So basically when we're out there, my car is being charged by sunshine.
Amazing. Dr. Eaves, what do you see as the biggest hurdle right now?
So it was very interesting in 2019, right before the pandemic. Every year there's a meeting of all the combustion scientists in Canada. And one of the panel questions, we had this panel. The panel question is, internal combustion engine versus an electric vehicle, what's going to happen? And I agree with this as well. To me, the biggest hurdle is being able to produce enough renewable electricity. As long as we're able to produce the renewable, like if everybody decided to drive electric vehicles tomorrow, everyone in the world, we don't have enough renewable energy. So what do we do about that? Well, we could burn natural gas. We could burn coal. If we're burning coal, we're actually further behind. So to me, in terms of the technology's there, it's technically feasible. We just have to increase our capacity for renewable energy. And once we do that, there really is no reason not to move towards electric vehicles. But again, I think the general gist of what all the panelists are kind of saying is that it's not going to happen overnight. It's something that's going to take time. Do I believe it's, as I said earlier, do I believe it's going to be on the timescale of what governments around the world currently think? Maybe not. But I do think it's going to happen.
Paul, we'll give last word to you.
Well, on a very simple level, I do think that there is a on the part of the public, a fear of electric cars, which is unnecessary. And it's based on the premise that, as you say, it takes you 5 minutes to go and gas up your car. And it might take hours to do it at a socket. But the point is, when your car's plugged in and you're filling it with energy, you are probably sleeping or working or having lunch. Wow, I like lunch. But basically, you plug your car in when you're doing something else. Whereas filling your car with gas, demands your full attention because you're hosing explosive liquid into a pipe. So, when people realize that, as Andrew says, the car's there ready for them, it's got 200 miles in the tank every morning. The number of times when you go more than 100 miles out and 100 miles back without stopping in a day, for most people is fairly small. So they may well use these rapid chargers, only half a dozen times a year. So in a sense, you could say they only spend 6 hours a year recharging. Whereas they'll probably spend 6 hours a year gassing up their car, in fact, their petrol car. So when people overcome that kind of conceptual hurdle, they find electric cars easier to own. And when they find electric cars easier to own, then more infrastructure will be put in. And so the thing will snowball, and renewable energy suppliers will find it economic to put up more windmills. The whole thing will grow. I mean, already in the UK, we've got enough windmills to power 10 million electric cars. And we don't have 10 million electric cars. We won't for a long time. And we will continue to install renewables, which is currently the cheapest form of energy in the UK. It's cheaper than gas. Gas energy, gas electricity. It's cheaper than nuclear. Off we go.
That's Paul Horrell. I'm going to call you, Paul, a world-renowned automotive journalist, because you are, with the wildly...
I said that on the CV I sent you.
Doesn't matter. It made it through our fact checkers, pal, so congratulations. It made it on air. You can read more about what Paul does at topgear.com, and of course you can follow his entire team on Twitter at BBC_topgear. Dr. Nick Eaves, who brought it this morning out of the University of Windsor, a PhD out of the U of Toronto, and a research associate out of the University of Cambridge, an expert in combustion and nanoparticle technology, and a good friend of the show, Andrew Bell. It's nice to reconnect with you, Andrew. We haven't spoken in a while, but it's been my pleasure to talk to you over the course of years, and our conversations have always been different as technology evolves and there's more uptake on EVs with regards to consumers, charging infrastructure, etc. I hadn't heard, though, that you had bought Tesla stock at $27, or I would have had you buy me lunch already. Andrew Bell with the Electric Vehicle Association of Alberta. You can find them online at albertaev.ca. To the three of you, thanks for this. I've learned a whole lot today. I know our audience has as well.
Thank you. Thanks for this.
Thank you very much.
Fun.
Great conversation. I see there's a lot of chatter going on in the live chat, and I'm going to be curious, Sarah in particular, to see what our inbox looks like when the podcast lands a little bit later on in the day. Real Talkers, we always want to hear from you. I like hearing these real life stories. I mean, these are people that are like, this is what it's like for us right now. This is not theory. This is not hypothetical. Tom chiming in, he says Southern Alberta is great for charging stations. He says we have more than we need so far. Tom says it takes me about 45 minutes to charge my car when on a long-range trip, and he says I tend to need one or maybe two stops when traveling. Your Beamer, your EV, I just can't help it.
Could you just lead with EV and maybe...
No, I love it, and it's a cool little unit. What's it called again? It's like the 1 Series or something. What's it called?
It's an i3.
An i3. It's a cool. It kind of has a bit of a smart car vibe to it.
It kind of does, yeah.
Yeah. So how long? So if you you have an internal combustion vehicle, correct? Like if you're driving to Kelowna, would you drive your i3, or would you? Because I guess you could get in a position. I mean, everyone's felt the anxiety on a long road trip where you should have filled up with gas and you didn't, and you're at like an eighth of a tank and you're hoping you can get to the next gas station. I would imagine it could be exacerbated if you're talking about an EV. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I refer to that as range anxiety.
Yes,
so
it's a real thing, though.
It's a real thing. I've gotten like neck cramps.
Yeah,
because I've been worried about it. So, all honesty, full transparency, I owned a Nissan Leaf, which is 100% electric, and I owned it for about a year, and I struggled because I bought it right when the pandemic hit, and I was feeling claustrophobic, and I just wanted to get outside and into nature. I really wanted to go to the mountains, and I couldn't. So I thought, I'll rent a car, and I did that for a time, and then I was like, this isn't working for me, especially because in Alberta, we don't have the infrastructure. Yes, we have the ones that you can just go and plug in, but it's maybe a couple of, you can't get a good solid charge, a good solid boost.
Yeah.
Whereas in BC, when I went out into BC, I plugged it in, and 20 minutes later, I was fully charged, which was incredible.
Really? 20 minutes?
Yeah. I was like, I went and I walked my dog because he's got a walk. And we were able to charge up and get on the road again. So I sold the Leaf, bought the i3 because what it has is it's called sorry, this is maybe too like nerd. But it has the range extender, which is not actually an engine. So I don't have oil, like I don't have to change the oil in my car. Is this an ad for BMW i3?
Yeah, be careful. We're gonna have to send them an invoice. No, this is real. We got to be able to talk about, right? I was just glad, to be honest. It would have been quite inconvenient if Volkswagen was a sponsor.
Yeah, totally.
Through the course of this conversation. But I noticed, like when we talk about, and we're all nerds and geeks, like to let everybody know the reason, and you can blame me, the reason why Real Talk is off the air tomorrow and Real Talk is off the air on Monday is because I am on my way to a 4-day fantasy hockey pool nerd fest. So no one's more nerdy than me. I'm going to go talk about pretend hockey teams that are made up of players that have no idea, real life players that have no idea they're on our pretend teams. So don't worry about being a nerd and a geek. But Sam, I see you. I mean, I think most people that tune into this show know that you are trained as an engineer. I mean, that's your university education as an engineer. And I was curious, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to the conversion kits, because you're just like me in the sense that you have an appreciation. You got and when I say old, I say that as a term of affection, a term of endearment.
It's old.
You've got a cool old pickup, and you've got a really cool old convertible, right? Like an early 80s Buick or something
Early
like
80s
that.
Buick, which only has a 307 in it, so I've got a little bit of engine envy.
Oh, well, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's still, every motor's got to fit its scenario, and the Cadillac that I drive weighs about 9,000 pounds, so we need that V8 to get it around. But are you the type of guy that, like, would you seriously consider, if it wasn't cost prohibitive, doing a conversion to an EV?
I think it depends on the vehicle, right? And like part of me is just like I like the engine that's in the Riviera. Like, full disclosure, it's not my car. It's my dad's car. It's the car that I actually grew up with as a kid. But it's one of those things where it is so heavy, that car, that like the conversion would be tricky in it.
Okay.
And like cars like the ones that Sarah drives and newer EVs are made of, lighter alloys and a lot of plastic parts. And, this Riviera is like from the era where chrome bumpers and steel, and when they converted them to convertibles, they added more steel to the body to make them stronger. Like, this car is by all metrics too heavy.
Yeah.
So I think that there is. Now, that being said, I love the idea of the classic cars converted. I love the idea of sort of giving them that new life. But this idea of synthetic fuels, which I actually first read about a couple months ago, I think it was in Wired or something like that, probably Wired. I think it's kind of that perfect bridge that we're looking for, because it takes the onus off of the individual for shelling out to do that conversion and do that thing and do that whole process, and just saying, well, here's a carbon neutral fuel. You don't have to change anything.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, largely just a better scenario for everyone.
Your partner, by the way, your partner Kelly is right now on the live chat, and she says, Jespo thinks our pickup is cool. Darn right, I think your pickup is cool. I develop, and this is actually, I don't think that this is necessarily positive. I'm the type, and I know the two of you are the exact same, because I see evidence of it. I develop emotional connections with my vehicles. The majority of them have names. It's like, how many vehicles? The majority of them have names, and to a fault, I will repair these vehicles to keep them around. And so I have a real appreciation for vehicles that exude character. And I think that your pickup is pretty cool. Nicole, meantime, says, Friday, you're off Friday. Ryan, you better be doing double the trash talk next week. Nicole, we've got trash talk coming up in like 10 minutes. Don't worry about it. It's just an early edition of trash talk, and we need to invite someone to eat their words before that. So we're about to ramp things up here on this Thursday edition of Real Talk. I'm getting some advice from some of you. For example, Lol is encouraging me to refrain from picking Josh Archibald on my fantasy team. Have you seen this story? The Edmonton Oiler expected to miss a minimum of 40 to 45 games, so says GM Ken Holland, because he's not getting vaccinated.
Well,
so he's
consequences.
Well, I mean, and like, these guys are leaving money. Like, Josh Archibald's, I mean, it's all relative. I was going to say he's not getting rich. I mean, he is getting rich, but he's not getting rich. He's not, I mean, this is like, for this guy, you've got a limited career window. Mm-hmm. I know for a lot of people, they're going to say, really, Ryan, you think it's all about money? This guy's taking a principled stand, not getting the vaccine. I just can't wrap my mind around it. But hey, National Hockey League, the Edmonton Oilers, and they're not the only team. Mm-hmm. There are other players as well that will not be taken to the ice. They won't be traveling. They won't be practicing with the team. They will not be in that room because they're not getting vaccinated. I still want to leave some time to talk to you all about this Get COVID party out of Edson. Can you believe this shit? It's unbelievable. That coming up in just a second. But first, veteran broadcasters do this all the time. That's called The Hook. Here it is. Every Thursday, our friends at Prairie Catering open the door and give us an opportunity to invite somebody to eat your words. Now, as if I need to tell you, on Monday, millions of Canadians tuned in to broadcast coverage of the 44th federal election. And that included CTV's coverage. Pretty remarkable panel, in fact, that included former politicians and current ones. But we had Olivia Chow there, we had Navdeep Bains there, and of course, popular Alberta, former MP, former minister, and I think for a lot of people, maybe the best prime minister that Canada will never have or hasn't had yet, Rona Ambrose. She was asked by host Lisa Laflamme what she made of Premier Jason Kenney's struggles in the polls and popularity, and here's what Rona Ambrose had to say.
He's had a tough time with a caucus that is divided on COVID issues. Not easy to govern this group, I'm going to be really honest, and he is doing the best he can. And I think what he did is stand up and say, I made a mistake. I think he listened to certain people. He tried to, at all times, listen to public health advice, and he said he made a mistake. And now he's trying to do everything he can and to convince those who don't believe in a vaccine passport that it is the right thing to do and the right way forward. And so we need to rally behind him and help him with that. Because
but where
there
was
are people
he for
that
3
just don't
weeks?
believe it.
I really, that was kind of a confusing thing. Did he choose to disappear for 3 weeks while the campaign was on, or what was going on there?
I think, like a lot of premiers, premiers like to stay out of a federal campaign. It's very unusual for premiers to come out and endorse one person over the other.
It wasn't
we already
about,
know
it was
that
about a health crisis in the province, though. Wouldn't that supersede the federal campaign for the people of Alberta?
Sorry, I thought you asked why wasn't he campaigning?
No, but why wasn't he visible?
He was on a vacation that he hadn't had any time off in 19 months, so he took 2 weeks off, and he's paying for that.
Yeah, but just on that point that Rona mentioned about premiers not participating, that is true, but Jason is the exception. He was the architect in 2011 of the breakthrough in the 905 in Ontario for Stephen Harper, really well regarded. And in the last campaign, he was campaigning for Andrew Scheer very aggressively in that 905 area where he had helped a lot of Conservatives win those seats in the past. Ironically, every place he visited, they lost. And this time around, no endorsement from him. So it's a very different Jason Kenney, not only in Alberta, but even in Ontario, where he was really revered and well regarded in some of those key ridings that we lost in 2011. So it was a really tough goal for him, and I think he made the strategic decision not to get involved because at the end of the day, he did endorse Aaron O'Toole during the leadership race against Peter MacKay. It was a pivotal endorsement, and I suspect he didn't want to get in the way.
So that was Navdeep Bains kind of, I guess, doing my work for me when it came to why I think that this video was a no-brainer for this week's edition of this feature. I get that Rona Ambrose and Jason Kenney are very close friends. I mean, Alberta's premier was involved in her recent wedding. He stood up for her. So I get it. She stands up for him, so to speak, on the national broadcast. But what she had to say is just not believable. I mean, did he really do his best to listen to the science? Would you characterize his relationship with Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, as a healthy one based on what we can see, based on all the information in front of us? And honestly, premiers staying out of the federal election, as former Minister Bains pointed out, this guy has had his fingers all over it up until he became a huge liability. So we were left with no choice but to invite former Alberta Minister, former MP Rona Ambrose to Eat Your Words. Of course, presented by our friends at Prairie Catering. Prairie Catering offers corporate catering for office meetings, in-person or virtual. They can deliver. You can host business meetings and conferences at the stunningly beautiful Art Gallery of Alberta. From executive boardrooms to a state-of-the-art theater, they can host up to 300 people under normal circumstances. And right now, they're making sure that there are masked and distanced options, of course, including their staff, so events can go on observing public health regulations. You can get 20% off any rental space at the Art Gallery of Alberta for your next corporate function when you mention Eat Your Words on Real Talk, valid for 2021 rental dates. I had no doubt that the minute I said the word Edson, it was going to start a fire. And that's because a story broke yesterday, and credit to City News, my former colleagues, like way back when. That's how my TV career got started, with the scrappy team at City News, breaking a story yesterday that Edmonton hospitals are filling up following a Get COVID party in the town of Edson, which, if you don't know, is approximately 2 hours west of Edmonton on the way out to Jasper National Park. That's right, a Get COVID party where people came together to, get COVID. Now, why on earth would you do that, you may ask? Well, the idea is that herd immunity can be achieved if everybody gets everybody sick. Well, it turns out it didn't work out well. And many of the people that were at that Get COVID party in Edson are now in Edmonton ICUs. I can't officially go on the record, but what I can tell you is that there is at least one instance that has had an absolutely tragic outcome, and we will report that in further detail when we can. I experienced feelings of anger. This is me trying to be somewhat diplomatic because we've had people on the show. Like I think of Professor Tim Caulfield, the Mythbuster, who has said, we don't want to pile on or we don't want to be aggressive toward anti-vaxxers or the unvaccinated. We want to meet them at an area where we can have dialogue and start to understand and start to answer questions they may have in productive fashion. But I'm going to tell you what. When I read that kids' cancer surgeries are being postponed, when I hear that adults can't have brain tumors removed and that those surgeries are being postponed because ICUs are full and because hospitals are absolutely tapped to the max because people are having Get COVID parties, I'm getting to the end of what was already, to be honest, a bit of a short fuse when it came to try to understand to this point why people aren't vaccinated. Now, I know that there's a few things we want to throw into the mix before I throw this to Sarah and Sam. I recognize that some people cannot get vaccinated. I recognize that there are roots of vaccine hesitancy that in many circumstances are cultural, and that's not something to be dismissed. I get it. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about people that are actively trying to get sick to achieve herd immunity. It's not something they understand. It's not something they know how to do, because if you did, you would never be at that party. And quite frankly, parties like this are having deadly consequences. Sarah Hoyles, are you in a position where you can still, I said I'm getting to a point where I'm running out of reasons to be understanding, diplomatic, or otherwise. Where are you at when you hear about a story like this?
Well, I just think back to hearing the story about Paul Brandt, and he said, I am going to deal with immunity and get immunity around having COVID. And we heard from epidemiologists saying that is not how it works. You still need the vaccine because your immunity only, it lessens over time. So it's paramount that you still get the vaccine. So to me, the party was successful in that people got COVID. They got exactly what they wanted. So I don't know. I still have sympathy. I still have sympathy because it's like these people have the wrong information.
Well, they have the wrong information, but at this point, I feel like you have to make an active effort to have the wrong information. The right information is being pounded home every single place that I see it.
Yeah, but when our conversation yesterday around AI and algorithms, they may not have access if they're getting their information from Facebook and the like. Their algorithms are pointing them to to more information that confirms their confirmation bias.
There were a lot of people that responded to my tweet, and I'm not surprised. Every once in a while, you hit send on something where you go, yeah, I think this is going to resonate. I think we're going to maybe get some material for the show. And you know what a lot of people had to say, Sam, is they wondered if a news headline from last week, where Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney said that the province was considering or exploring the idea that people that had COVID survivors, let's call them, may have a natural immunity that could sub in the context of a so-called vaccine passport, or whatever we're calling it, the restrictions exemption program. And some people said to me, and I thought it was a really great point, they wondered if maybe that news headline coming straight from the Premier of the province would influence or empower people like this that are having these Get COVID parties. Where's your head at on the story?
I have two takes on this story. The first of which is people are comparing these get COVID parties to get chickenpox parties, which are, things that at a certain time, people don't do them anymore, but one kid in the grade 1 class would have chickenpox and they'd invite their friends over and then they'd all get it and it would run through their systems. And, when you're a kid and when you get chickenpox at the time, you take oatmeal baths and you play Lego for a week and it just sort of runs its course. But COVID is not chickenpox. It is a very serious respiratory disease that will kill you. So that's point number one.
Could kill you. Could kill you.
Yeah. Point number two is my blood is boiling about this misunderstanding of what herd immunity is. We have herd immunity against things like smallpox and measles and polio, and it's not because people got the disease and carry some sort of natural immunity to it. It's because a significant portion of the population got vaccinated, and therefore, it doesn't spread, it doesn't carry, it doesn't move through the population. And I will point out that the entire concept of herd immunity is to protect the people that can't be vaccinated. So, this notion of go get COVID so it runs through your system and you're naturally immune completely flies in the face of this.
Kim PG says, some people still do have these chickenpox parties. She says, trust me, it's equally stupid. What is that? Is that just basically Tinder? Is this a euphemism? Is that what the chickenpox party is? Is that what Tinder is? I don't know. Let me say this, and I should clarify something as well. I tweeted after Darcy Ropechen, who's the journalist for City News that broke this story yesterday out of Edson. I did tweet that there are many reasons I didn't follow in my dad's footsteps and become a doctor. And among them, the fact that I'd have no problem refusing care to morons like this group from Edson. Meantime, kids' brain surgeries are being canceled because hospitals are full. It's absolutely infuriating. I should clarify that also among the many reasons that I didn't follow in my dad's footsteps and become a doctor is because I didn't have the marks to get into med school. That's also a valid point that should be included in the debate.
There just weren't enough characters.
There just weren't enough characters. I would have clarified that there was no medical school in the country that was so desperate for enrollment that they were willing to overlook my 59% in Math 30. 59% in Math 30. This is a PSA to kids that are struggling right now with school, that if you get a 59% in Math 30, you can still make something of your life, just not in a hospital.
I got 50.
Really?
Like on the button.
Like on the button. Yeah. I don't know why I would have thought. I'm stereotyping here, Hoyles, but your attention to detail, the way that you sort of people don't get to see behind the scenes what you bring to the show, but like when Sarah got hired, basically it was a bit of a rat's nest. Our bookings, Sam was just along for the wild ride. We'd have, in some circumstances, guests would sign into the Zoom and just show up on the show, and it would be news to Sam because I forgot to tell him there's another. Again, it was just an absolute disaster. And then you come in, and we've got Google Docs and all kinds of organization things. I would have thought that you in math would have been 87 to 95%.
Oh man, I had tutors. I stayed, I did extra work.
So you were trying.
My mom didn't think I was, but I was trying. I really, really was. And my brain just doesn't work like that. I can't seem to wrap my head around it. So I always what's the tip? What do we do?
I don't know, and I don't even know if this is responsible. I hope it's okay to do this, but it's being reported on our live chat. I've not confirmed it. I don't know, but you'll remember the guy's last name, Eric. Eric was the guy that tweeted the CT scan of his brain tumor.
Right.
You remember that? And that was a photo that just went viral. He basically said, "This is my brain tumor." Didn't they say it was the size of it was a decent sized tumor and the size of an egg or something like that?
So I think they were comparing it to a grapefruit.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean,
grapefruit or an orange.
Geez. I mean, what do you call the oranges now? Is it mandarin orange? Is that okay to say?
Mandarin orange, yeah.
Okay. I remember they used to be called something else that's definitely not okay. Mandarin orange is okay. Yeah, you guys are going, what? That's because you guys are in your 30s and I'm in my 40s.
They've been mandarin oranges my entire life.
Yeah, they weren't always mandarin oranges in my life. Those who know. But remember also when I used to dial phone calls, it used to be like zzz, da 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 zzz, da 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 da. So I do have an old school element to it.
Eric Mulder.
Kimberly is reporting on our live chat that Eric had his surgery yesterday, which is absolutely amazing to hear. I do hope that that's true. Kimberly, I have no reason not to trust you. I appreciate you putting that into the ethos. I think that that's going to be an encouragement for everybody. You can, Daniel says he read my tweet and agrees wholeheartedly. There are a bunch of people that totally disagree with me, and that's fine as well. When we say we want to hear from you, we mean it. And we don't just want to hear from you if you agree with us. As a matter of fact, if you disagree with us, a lot of times it means a little bit more, because we want this show to be a home for respectful disagreement, dialogue, and debate. And that doesn't mean that we get together and have church services, small c, of course, and we don't just come together with someone preaching to you, you lapping it all in without thinking about it and then going about your day. That's not the mandate of this show. It's not the purpose of Real Talk. In just a second, we're going to fire things up to wrap up this short broadcast week. But first, I want to remind you that this weekend, if you're looking for hot eats or cool treats, our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park are ready to hook you up. That's right, the Dairy Queens at Baseline Road, Westmount, Palisades, Nemeo, and Newcastle, featuring, as part of their fall lineup, the Pecan Pie Blizzard Treat, the Pumpkin Pie Blizzard Treat, both of them topped with that whipped topping. Of course, that's on top of that famous Dairy Queen soft serve. You got the real crumbly brown sugar pie pieces and the crunchy pecans and the pecan pie blizzard, and you've got real pumpkin pie pieces and nutmeg on top of that pumpkin pie blizzard treat. You can find them both at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Hey, this is the last time that we're going to have a chance to remind you about Rugby Sevens touching down in Edmonton. That's because it's coming up this weekend. That's right, September 25th and 26th, Rugby Sevens comes to Commonwealth Stadium in what could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take in the festival atmosphere, the incredible spectator experience that is Rugby Sevens. It's presented by Explore Edmonton, a dynamic high-octane style. It features 7 players per side playing 7-minute halves. It's described as fast and fun. It's for everyone. You can get your tickets at canada7s.com. We want to let you know you've got to provide proof of full vaccination or a negative on-site COVID test. That's the requirements, and masks will be required if you're not in your designated seat. Of course, due to the event being outdoors, you can remove your masks when you get to your seat. They're offering right now single-day ticket passes on sale. That means you can attend for as little as $60 for a full-day pass, again, at canada7s.com. Our friends at Local Waste want to remind you 'tis the season for yard cleanups, basement purges. You don't want to be doing that when it's minus 25. Why not get to localwaste.ca today? Get in touch with the team and ask them about solutions. You don't need the big, huge industrial bins all the time. Unless you do, they've got those too. But if you need a smaller bin picked up, delivered, taking all of the hassle out of that big job on your to-do list, Local Waste has been earning the trust. Integrity is their top priority for more than 25 years. Still family-owned at localwaste.ca. As we wrap up our broadcast week, each and every week, our friends at Local Waste give us an opportunity to blow off a little steam. It's a cathartic exercise we call Trash Talk. I know you won't be surprised to hear that we have a ton of emails to get to today. It starts with Ronan, who, number one, says, "Fuck cancer!" Ronan, I'm with you. It's been a tough number of days, but I know us real talkers are in it together, but fuck cancer. Ronan says 2 bumbling morons have run our province into the ground. Besides this, and by the way, earmuffs, kids, this one's for mommy and daddy. Besides the pandemic clusterfuck, there's a shit list a mile long that these assholes are responsible for. The stupidest part is that people will still nail their flag to that ship in 2023. Ronan says, I honestly didn't think conservative voters in Alberta could muster up as many brain cells as they might need to form a critical thought, but I don't see evidence that it's happening. There's got to be at least 2 million heads full of those brain cells, right? Ronan says, I moved to Calgary from Ireland 11 years ago, expecting to live here for the rest of my life. After the last 12 months, I'm starting to doubt that I will. That from Ronan. What about this one from Ricky, who says, I felt so many different emotions over the the last year and a half. Sadness, joy. They welcomed their first child to the planet in October. Congratulations, Ricky. Frustration, anger, and fear. All this to say, I'm done. I'm done with the way the pandemic's been handled here. It's nothing but a disgrace. I'm done with the government bungling its response at every turn, causing unneeded stress, loss of life, and quality of life. It's not been expressed by government experts that this amount of loss was avoidable. Why not? He says, what I'm calling for is the resignation of the Premier and the Chief Medical Officer of Health and schools to be supported in the fight against COVID. I sincerely hope this does not fall on deaf ears and that my points are considered and maybe read on Trash Talk. Ricky, thanks for chiming in. This one from Tanya, who says an 18-year-old died this week from COVID. Completely preventable and utterly unforgivable. Second, we got these turds out of Edson with a COVID party to achieve herd immunity. Clogging up ICUs in Edmonton. We're canceling pediatric surgeries to make room for unvaccinated adults. It's beyond infuriating. Okay, so these people talk about how we can't saddle kids with debt, but you're okay with saddling them with a burning planet? Pulling them away from their friends for almost 2 years, or disrupting their education time after time? Let's face it, you don't really care about kids. This is about you doing whatever you want, as long as life's normal for you, not disrupting your status quo. The kids are collateral damage. Tanya signs off, one angry mom who cares enough about your kids to get vaccinated. That from Tanya. We got this one here, an email from Trash Talker Angry Adam, who says all this talk about the People's Party on the show, the PPC didn't win a seat. Maybe it's a pimple on the elephant's ass, like I heard about on Real Talk, but I feel a more accurate description would be that it started as a pimple on the elephant's ass, and then judging white nationalist support in Canada, counting votes for the PPC is a delusional way of perceiving reality. So here's the deal. Starts as a pimple, the elephant felt it every time it sat down, and so committed to standing for a significant amount of time. When the pimple directs behavior of the elephant, the pimple's gotta go. Now there is a simple solution, yet no one's going to pop that pimple. And let's qualify what I'm talking about. He says the elephant is the Conservative Party. The pimple is the alt-right. I've never seen a pimple on any living organism that covers over 50% of the body, but I'm not here to debate the poor quality of the metaphor. So we're talking about the loud and proud portion of the pimple and how we should approach it. I am not saying kill the elephant. I'm saying the elephant needs to kill the pimple, even though it knows that killing the pimple will kill the elephant. Okay? Still with me? If the elephant wants to ensure life for its children, it knows what it has to do. It started as a minor irritation, but before long, the elephant was asking its friends, hey bro, do you mind? I've got this pimple on my ass and it's painful. You mind checking it out and telling me if you think it's infected? To which the friend looks, throws up in their mouth, and replies, a little bit of swelling, but I wouldn't worry. Adam wraps by saying, don't be arrogant. A pimple on an elephant's ass became the 45th president of the United fucking States. People love to blame Donald Trump for the woes of division we now face, but he's just an opportunist. Born of an economic system that breeds narcissistic thirst for wealth, he was the prime candidate to exploit a rotten system. Angry Adam says, we love to call China out on this, but where do you think they learned it from? Russia? If that was the first thing that came to your mind, find the nearest library and don't leave until my cat comes when it's called. That from Angry Adam, who had me talking about pimples on elephants' asses way longer than I ever thought I would. Trash Talk submissions are sent to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We always want to hear from you. Make sure you label it clearly in the subject line. Coming up next week, Tuesday, our first show of the week, Positive Reflections. Talk about a digital currency for Canada. We'll talk to the founder of Orange Shirt Day, Phyllis Webstad, and we are dedicating next Thursday's show, September 30th, to a meaningful discussion on reconciliation in Canada. I'm already looking forward to it. Real Talkers, thanks for showing up every day in more ways than one. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon. Catch you on the flip side.